Hello, Kipsters. Today is Monday, March 1st. We are going to be going into an entirely new topic today, and we're going to be reverting back to our Nearpod music lessons that we were working on for the fourth and fifth graders towards the beginning of the year, and for the second and third graders more towards November, December. So essentially what you'll need to be doing during this, I'm going to give you a little run through really quick while you're watching. As you get your Nearpod links and lessons on Google Classroom, there will be a Nearpod link that directly takes you to your Nearpod, so you don't have to worry about putting in a code, but there will also be a code provided just in case you're someone who likes to put in the code. What you'll do is you'll get on your Nearpod and you'll be watching this YouTube video that you're watching right now at the same time you're navigating your Nearpod. So for example, I see my code here, P9FNE. P9FNE. It takes me to the Nearpod. And what you'll be doing is watching me do this Nearpod as you are also following along in your Nearpod. So you'll need two tabs up. You'll need YouTube up over here so that you can, be watching my YouTube video and hearing me in the background kind of explain these slides, while also watching at the same time your own Nearpod so that you can follow along and participate with me on the Nearpod slides that I have available. Okay. So again, you're going to be watching this YouTube video that you're watching right now at the same time that you're following along in this student-paced Nearpod. Okay. I know we haven't done this in a while, so I wanted to make sure I reiterated how this worked so that we can be the most effective on day one and continue on through these next few weeks with this same method. So we will be doing this Nearpod method for the next few weeks, just so you can be clear on that and get as comfortable with it as possible. All right, again, today is March 1st, okay? New month. Some of us are back in school. Some of us are still working at home, okay? So we wanted to make sure we get as much growth in these last few months as possible. We've done so well so far, and I'm looking forward to finishing out these remaining months with you all this year, okay? As you move on, as you see me click on the video or hear me say next on the slide, you can go ahead and move on as well on your slide so that we know that we're all together during this, okay? So go ahead and move on to next. All right. As I was saying earlier, we are going to be learning about the instruments, the musical instrument families. So our first musical instrument family that I wanted to talk about today was the brass family. Okay, you can see right here in this picture, that is a brass instrument. And a really good way to tell if an instrument is brass is by what it's made of. Okay, if the instrument is made of metal, then it's most likely a brass instrument. Now, there are some instruments that are made of metal, of course, that aren't brass, but a pretty good indicator of what type of instrument it is by what type of material it's made out of. And a lot of brass instruments, most or all of them, are metal instruments, and that's why they're called brass. Okay, moving on to the next slide, if you're following along. On this slide, we have a common instruments of the brass family, a few common instruments from the brass family. So I'm going to read it from top to bottom as you guys follow along. Our first one we have is the cornet. Okay, and the cornet is very tricky because it looks a lot like a trumpet, but it's a much smaller instrument. And we'll talk about those differences here as we move on. Our next instrument is called the baritone horn, or just baritone. You don't have to say horn on the end of it. The next one's a little bit more of a tricky word, but that third word down is euphonium. And a euphonium is also tricky because it looks a lot like baritone, but we're not going to learn about euphonium today. But very cool instrument as well, and will be discerned in the next couple of days what that is. The French horn is the instrument you just saw in the previous slide, and also that third instrument right there on the right, that smaller, windier one, that is the French horn. You also have the trombone, which most of you may have seen before, the big one with the big slide that goes like this. The trumpet, which is the most popular of all brass instruments, and probably all instruments in general. It is very, very popular. And then the last and final instrument, the biggest of all instruments, is the tuba. Okay, so these are the common instruments of the brass family. They are not all the instruments, of course. There are more and variations of different instruments, like a smaller tuba or even a bigger trumpet like a bugle or a flugelhorn. So there are various types of these instruments, but these are your core 7 main instruments in the brass family, and we're going to dive in a little deeper about each of them as we go on through this week. The first instrument we have up is, of course, the top of the top, the best of the best, the trumpet. Okay. And during this, as just a little precursor, there will be videos on this slide that you can either continue to listen to me and watch the video with, or pause the YouTube video and then move on your own and watch the video on your own, so you don't have to hear two videos at once. But up to you how you do that. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we get there. All right, moving on about the trumpet, I'm going to read this as you guys follow along with me. The trumpet is the brass instrument with the highest register in the brass family. That means that the trumpet, out of all the brass instruments, is the one that can play the highest notes. All right, so a lot of instruments can play high notes. The trumpet is the one that can take it even further than those. Okay, so it is the highest playing brass instrument. This means it plays notes that are higher than every other instrument. Not every other instrument in music, but just every other instrument in the brass family. Trumpets used to be used to send signals in battle or hunting and have a very long history dating back to at least 1500 BCE. So that means, you know how the year is 2021 right now? 1500 BCE means 1500 years before the year zero. So right now is 2021. The year zero was the first year that we started counting until 2021. And then 1500 years before year zero, where they weren't keeping time the same, that's why they do it so weird, is when the trumpet was invented. So the trumpet is over 3,000 years old, a very old instrument. And, very, like I said, one of the most popular. So it's very important that we get this knowledge of what this instrument is and what it has done for music. Trumpets have been used as musical instruments since the 15th century. So back in the day, they were just used to kind of like announce your presence and say, I'm here, we're charging, we're doing this, we're doing that. And now they're more so, well, since the 1400s, they're more so for using them in the instrument setting. Okay, moving on. This is where I was talking about earlier. So if you want to watch this video with me, you can go ahead and continue on and watch this video with me, or you can pause the YouTube video and watch this video on your own. But I'm going to press play now, and we will watch this video for the next 4 to 5 minutes.
A trumpet is made up of 1.5 meters of tubing. 3 valves allow air to flow through additional tubing to alter the trumpet's pitch. Trumpets are made from sheets of metal, most often brass. This factory combines different thicknesses in a single instrument to attain a particular sound. Workers first lay a template on a brass sheet and trace it out. Then they cut along the score line with electric shears. This piece will become the trumpet's bell. A manually operated press forms a perfect fold down the middle. Then they notch the edges. They close up the bell by hammering the notched pieces onto the opposite edge. They use a rawhide mallet because anything harder would damage the brass. They melt a brass alloy along the joint. It solidifies into a metal seam that bonds the edges to each other permanently. They slip the bell over a cone-shaped mandrel and hammer the brass until it, too, is cone-shaped. Then the bell goes onto another mandrel mounted on a lathe. They push the brass against the mandrel to finalize the shape. Then they file the metal smooth. Now for the bell's rim, called the bead. A brass rod with a notch at the end catches the edge of the bell and rolls it back into a rim. They use what's called a concave roller to round the rim's jagged edge. Then they slide a brass alloy wire into the rim pocket. This makes the bell stronger and adds weight to the edge of the flare to project sound better. They roll the rim over even more to enclose the wire. Now they heat the rim and apply acid flux to clean the surface for soldering. Lead or silver solder ensures the wire won't rattle when the bell vibrates. After wiping off the excess flux, they put the bell back on the lathe and scrape off the excess solder. Using an abrasive sponge, they smooth away any scratches left by the scraper. Then they remove any solder bits trapped in the rim. Now they fill the entire bell with a soap and water solution, then freeze it at -49°C. When the water is frozen, they place the bell in a bending block. The ice provides counterpressure, preventing the brass from buckling inward. The ice itself doesn't shatter under the pressure because the soap in the water makes it pliable. After checking the angle of the bend with a gauge, they let the bell defrost. In the mounting department, workers assemble smaller components made of brass and nickel, valve casings, the sliding tubes to which they connect, the slide for tuning the trumpet, the pipe that holds the mouthpiece. Then they solder on the bell. They lubricate 3 pistons and install one in each valve casing. These slides have to fit loosely enough to move freely, but tightly enough to prevent air leaks. One slide has a finger ring for holding the trumpet. After polishing and lacquering the brass, they test the trumpet for sound quality. This is one company that likes to blow its own horn.
Awesome. If you are moving on in the Nearpod, go ahead and press next now. And if you are moving on in the YouTube video, this is where we begin. Okay, we have a quiz. We're going to just a quick 1-question quiz. What type of metal is a trumpet made of? Okay, we have 4 options here. Is it made of steel? Is it made of brass? Is it made of copper? Or is it made of iron? Okay, we have 4 valid metals here. Which one is the trumpet made of? Now, we talked about, right now we're learning about a specific type of instrument family. And is it the steel family of instruments? Did I say it was the copper family of instruments? Iron family of instruments? Or did I say it was the brass family? If you remember correctly, I said that we were working with the brass family. And of course, these instruments are brass instruments because they are made of brass. Okay, so when we answer this question, go ahead and put brass and move on and submit. Hopefully you had some time to think of your own answer there. If not, awesome. Moving on, watch a little quick video here. If you want to just continue watching my video on YouTube or listening to my video, you can watch with me, or you can watch the whole video on your own if you want as well.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, here's one you all can sing with us.
This is a video of Louis Armstrong.
marching in.
Very famous for his voice, very famous for his trumpet playing.
Everybody sing. Now when the saints go marching in. Now when the saints go marching in.
skipping ahead a little bit to see if I can find a trumpet part. Good. And if you want to go ahead and pause your video, or you can finish watching that video if you want on your own, I'm going to move on, though. And the other instrument there that was playing a lot was the clarinet, which is what I played when I was in college. Moving on to the next instrument, and this instrument is called the cornet. Now, the cornet is a brass instrument, very much like I said earlier, similar to the trumpets. And as you can see in that picture, it looks just like a trumpet. It just is much smaller and doesn't have as high of a quality or high of a note capacity as the trumpet does. How can you tell the difference between the cornet and the trumpet? The cornet is more compact, has more of a cone-shaped tube instead of the straighter tube on the trumpet, and its sound is more mellow. So the trumpet has a brighter sound. It sounds kind of like piercing sometimes, and the cornet is more mellow and more dark and more deep. And of course, it is a shorter instrument, like I said. So when you see it, it looks kind of like a miniature trumpet, but there's still even a tinier trumpet than that. But this one is, I'd say about this big, when a trumpet's like this big. So it's a very minor difference how big they are. But as you can see in this next video, they will explain a little better about the difference.
This instrument here on the top is a cornet, and this instrument here on the bottom is a trumpet, for anyone who is unsure. Now, these two instruments both have some definite similarities. They've both got 3 valves. They both have a very similar shape, but both roughly a similar size, but they come from 2 different origins. This trumpet here is simply a development on old trumpets, and what they did to develop it was simply to add 3 valves. The cornet, on the other hand, doesn't come from trumpets. It's actually a development of an instrument called a post horn. Now, these 2 origins have manifested themselves in one way, and that way is the key difference between these 2 instruments. Firstly, a trumpet, the diameter of this tubing stays the same all throughout the length of the instrument, through all these different tuning slides, and it only starts changing once it gets to about here. This home straight of the instrument, the tubing gradually gets thicker until it flares out into what we call the bell section up here. Whereas if we contrast that with a cornet, the cornet's the diameter of the tubing of the cornet gradually gets bigger as its length increases. So as we get through here, the tubing is getting slightly thicker, and it's continuing that growth all throughout the instrument. Some of the purely aesthetic differences between the cornet and trumpet lie in the configuration of its lead pipe. Trumpet has a very straight lead pipe that goes around here, it curves once and it goes into the 3rd valve. Whereas the cornet, the lead pipe twists once, twice, and 3 times into the 3rd valve. Both instruments share the same valve configuration. The 1st valve tuning slide is the same length, the 2nd valve tuning slide on both is the same length, and the 3rd valve tuning slide is also the same length. The hand grips are roughly the same. We've got a little finger ring there and another one here. But whereas the trumpet has manual slides for the 1st and 3rd valve tuning slides, so we can move this in and out manually, the cornet utilizes triggers. Now, these triggers are a mechanical feature, whereas if you push this down, it extends the tuning slide. This particular cornet is a Besson Sovereign, and it has those triggers on the 3rd and 1st tuning slide, whereas most trumpets, in fact, I don't think I've ever seen a single trumpet that has triggers on the tuning slides. Instead, they have these thumb.
Good. So we're going to move on from that. Just a couple key differences to kind of help you visually see the difference between a trumpet and a cornet. And I really didn't know this before, or like you maybe just realized it again. But I'd say the main difference here is like that valve he was talking about, that one that kind of just stays straight, whereas this one, has more curves in it, and you can visually see how many curves it has in it compared to the trumpet. So pretty cool video. If you want to continue watching the rest of that, go ahead and just press play on it, or you can move on to the next slide now. And actually, that is the last video. I wanted to make sure we wrapped up before the 20-minute mark, and we're just on it. Okay, so again, if you want to go ahead and continue watching those videos, you can finish those videos out. You can go back, but for now, this is the end of your first Nearpod lesson. Tomorrow, we will be learning about 2 new instruments. Okay, and each day we'll try to learn about 2 or 3 instruments and then have a review sessions towards the end of the week. As always, Mr. Isaac has 3 things for you. You are kind, you are smart, you are important. I look forward to the day that I see you guys again. And until then, have an awesome day.